Still, there are times when I think what a terrible mistake I've made with my life.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we all have these thoughts from time to time.
Hello and welcome back to the Cine-Files, where we continue our exploration of The Remains of the Day. Where we left off, Mr. Stevens had just compartmentalized the death of his father in order to do his duty as a butler. Now, in the present day, he drives into a small town, stops at a market to pick up a letter, and when the clerk asks him where he's from, he replies, Darlington.
That rings a bell. Wasn't there a Lord Darlington, some sort of Nazi, got us in the war, they say?
And he totally denies it. I didn't work for that lord.
I'm the butler at Darlington Hall, and my employer is Mr. Lewis, an American gentleman.
This is like Christ. It's like Peter denying Christ. You know what I'm saying? It's a really interesting moment. Well, and it comes up more than once.
My first reaction was, wow, that's a crazy metaphor. But my second reaction is actually, I totally agree, because Peter's whole identity is Christ, is based on Christ. That is the most important. So, because what Stevens is denying here isn't just Lord Darlington. He is denying the key. We just saw what I think is his most heroic moment, continuing to serve Lord Darlington at the time of his father's death.
Yeah.
And now he is denying that identity, 20 years later.
Yep.
I hear the young ladies from Germany have arrived.
Yes, my lord, they're just outside.
And in come these two girls, and he tries to speak German to them, and he's very nice to them. And then we hear that they're going to work there. It's like, well, this is odd. And then these beautiful cars pull up, and we have more servants and more lords, and we also see these guys dressed in black shirts. And probably most Americans don't know this, but there were the black shirts in England, and they were pro-fascist, anti-Semitic, connected to a bunch of people in government, and not good guys.
Gentlemen, you speak of Jews and gypsies, Negroes, so on and so forth. But one has to regard the racial laws of the fascists as a sanitary measure, much overdue, in my opinion.
And the lord there, who's the guy who I think is Sir Geoffrey, has the black shirts with him, says, you cannot run a country without a penal system. We call them prisons. They call them concentration camps. And in the midst of this, he's also asking if the soup is, has meat in it. And it's just, and they talk about labor. And he says, believe me, no workers strike in Germany, and everyone's kept in line. And then no wonder this country is going down the drain.
But where have I heard this before? It's same arguments every generation. Oh, no wonder the country's going to shit because of this, because of the drug, the hippies. No wonder the country's going to shit because of these kids. They don't pay attention. They're out there, doing coke and watching 80s movies and glow sticks. And it's every...
Wait, can we do that?
Yeah, well, no, not anymore. But like in those days, every generation has a complaint about the previous generation, man. That's just the way it always is. And it's always,
but I don't think this one is generational.
You don't think we're talking about foreign people coming and taking our jobs or people of color? We're doing that now. We do it every generation. We try to what is it? Scapegoat immigrants or religious people of a certain religion or something. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Right. But you were saying, what I thought you were saying was more this generation looking at the younger generation and what they're doing and judging them, which I think obviously is a thing that happens, but I don't think that's what's happening. I think it's more the second thing you said of scapegoating, because this is about labor and, rich people. Yeah. And of course and it's so funny to be the butlers being invisible allows these people to say terrible things about the lower classes right in front of them because they don't think of them as human.
Good point.
We're in maybe the most casual scene we ever see Stevens. He's sitting with Mr. Benz, who is another butler who has arrived, Tim Pigott Smith, and they're listening to music and they're smoking and they're having a couple of drinks. And Mr. Benz is like, you've made yourself a very cozy little nest here. And they talk about whether or not he's contented.
In my philosophy, Mr. Ben, a man cannot call himself well contented until he has done all he can to be of service to his employer. Of course, this assumes that one's employer is a superior person, not only in rank or wealth, but in moral stature.
So his identity is based on the fact that Lord Darlington is a superior person.
Yeah.
I think this idea, and we see it throughout our society as well, that rich people are in some way superior.
Yeah.
That this is social Darwinism, that they got there for a reason, that they deserve wealth. And it's like, certainly Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or, whatever a person, creates a company, then they have shown that they have impressive abilities. I don't think to the level of, Jeff Bezos' richness right now. I think that's insane. But the kids, like if you're the fourth generation Rockefeller, you didn't earn that money.
Nope.
And yet they still walk around thinking they're superior people.
What do they call it? Think they hit a triple when they woke up on third base, that kind of thing. Yep, absolutely.
That's the expression. Well, and the other thing too is Lord Darlington, I'm sure, went to Eton and Oxford and had the privilege of the finest education, of the finest things, of the finest everything. And so he is, again, on third base. He is superior in many ways to the people that didn't have the advantages that he had. But the only reason that's true is because he had the advantages he had.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like, I was very fortunate that, and did I work hard? Yeah. But I was like, they've just outlawed that, or not outlawed, but there are all these universities not taking the SATs right now because of the pandemic. And I would not have gotten into Berkeley if I didn't have high SAT scores. And part of why I had high SAT scores is my parents paid for me to take an SAT training thing.
Right.
So like the fact that my parents could afford to pay for that thing is part of why I got into Berkeley. Does that mean that I didn't deserve to go to Berkeley? No, I mean, I worked hard and I got into Berkeley, but it means that someone just as talented and smart as me didn't get into Berkeley because their parents couldn't afford to pay for that thing.
Right.
That's privilege.
Yep.
And Lord Darlington has way more than an SAT prep class, backing him up.
That's true. Very, very true.
And in your opinion, what's going on up there has moral stature, does it?
And Stevens doesn't want to hear any of that at all. He's listening to the music. And he says, to listen to the gentleman's conversations would distract me from my work. Is that true? Does he not listen, or does he listen and chooses not to hear?
I think Stevens has heard every single line that's been uttered in that house.
That's what I think too.
He's just choosing not to be a part of it. Yeah.
Then in comes Miss Kenton with some fresh soda for their drinks. And they ask her to stay, and she leaves. And Tim Pickett-Smith watches her walk away. Good-looking woman. And then this moment is so interesting because we hear that she had worked with Mr. Ben at some other place and that the place wasn't the same as soon as she left. And then Stevens, who's had a few drinks, says,
"I'd be lost without her."
He's really revealing it.
Yeah. And then in the next moment, he kind of makes it more, a first-rate housekeeper is essential in a house like this one. But that's not what I think he said. I think he wasn't saying the house would be lost without her, or she's a great housekeeper.
Yeah.
I think he was saying I'd be lost without her.
Yeah. He's talking about himself. Absolutely.
The German girls, which we find out, of course, are Jewish girls, are working at the fireplace as the Lord walks by. And he is reading a book, which we hear in voiceover, that is a very logical and very detailed explanation for pure anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the book is. I don't think that's from Mein Kampf. But it is just, as a Jewish person listening to it, it's just horrible.
Stevens, we have some refugee girls on the staff at the moment, I believe.
We do, my lord. 2 housemaids, Elsa and Emma.
You'll have to let them go, I'm afraid.
So, first of all, he doesn't say that I want to let them go. He says, you have to let them go.
Right.
This is just like the birds and the bees.
Yep.
It's an awkward thing, and it's like, you have to go do them.
It's regrettable, Stevens, but we have no choice. You've got to see the whole thing in context. I have the well-being of my guests to consider.
And Stevens, to his little bit of credit, says, may I say they work extremely well.
He tries to push back a little bit. He tries
a little pushback. Yeah.
to stop it from happening. He senses this isn't a right thing, and maybe influenced by having had that conversation with Mr. Bentz, as you said, maybe that with a younger, by the way, that's a younger Butler.
Right.
And, as I said, things are changing in the world that this film takes place. And maybe having had that conversation, he feels the little impetus to step and push back a little bit. But of course, James Fox shuts it down.
I'm sorry, Stevens, but I've looked into this matter very carefully. There are larger issues at stake. I'm sorry, but there it is. They're Jews.
We just finished a great episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier, and there's an interaction between Sam Wilson and the new Captain America. And Captain America is like trying to convince him to be on his side, to fight with him against what's going on in the show. And he says, I'm trying to be the best I can be, and it would really help if I had Cap's wingman by my side. And that's Sam says in that moment, it's always that last line. And it's true, right? We've seen that in interactions. We've seen that in movies. And in this moment, the same thing. It's always that last line. Well, Stevens, they're Jews. He's been talking all around it and then finally puts it on the table blatantly. And it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, and in that whole, honorable man thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and it is also, by the way, in addition to being anti-Semitic, it's a class thing because these are poor people. These are servants. Right. They're not worthy. In addition to being Jewish, he doesn't think of them the way he thinks of his German friend who killed himself.
Great point. Doesn't think about putting them out, having them suffering to figure out how to pay their bills or whatever. Why? Because there's a personal connection to them. So what matters? It doesn't matter what happens to them. We just need them out. You're right. It's pick and choose. Yeah.
I'm amazed that you can stand there as if you were just discussing orders for the larder. I simply can't believe it. You're saying that Elsa and Irma are to be dismissed because they're Jewish.
And Stevens, who is, again, it's his identity is to serve the Lord. The Lord made the decision. Yeah. That's it. We can't question it. And Emma Thompson's fantastic, of course, and says,
I'm telling you, Mr. Stevens, if you dismiss my girls tomorrow, it will be wrong. A sin, as any sin ever was one.
And this gets into another point that's going to come up much more later in the movie. Stevens says, there are many things you and I don't understand in this world of today. His lordship understands fully. It's not just an abdication of status or that I am inferior to this person in terms of status or serve them. It is, we can't know stuff. The higher classes know things that we can't know. Mm-hmm. That is the position that he is taking.
Yeah.
So this, even though he knows that this is wrong, or he thinks it seems wrong to him, but the Lord must know more than me.
Mr. Stevens, I warn you, if those girls go, I shall leave this house.
And now we have an interview with a new person to be a new maid. And it is Lena Headey.
Yes, young Lena Headey.
20 years old at the time. Yeah. And Stevens thinks she's unsuitable. She doesn't have good references. She doesn't have as much experience.
She's not suitable.
She'll do well. I'll see to it.
And Stevens, and again, this is such a dick move at this moment. He is smiling because he thinks he has something on her. He says, didn't you say you were leaving because of the German girls? And I think it's like seeing that she didn't live up to the choice she made makes it okay the choice he made.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Battle again for pointing out the faults of the other.
Exactly.
This eternal battle.
And then Miss Kenton is the only person who expresses real emotions and truth in this movie. She says,
I'm not leaving.
Oh?
I've nowhere to go. I have no family. I'm a coward.
It's such an admission of truth. It is saying, I firmly believe this. I still firmly believe this. And I'm scared. And this is my home. And I cannot leave. And again, it's like dad dying. It's like someone opens up emotionally. You should join them on some level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
All I see out in the world is loneliness, and it frightens me. That's all my high principles are worth, Mr. Stevens.
He takes it in, and he says,
Miss Kenton, you mean a great deal to this house.
And Stevens struggles for his words. He says,
you're extremely important to this house. Miss Kenton.
And what he's saying, what he wants to be saying is, you're important to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But he can't say that.
Yep.
And she know, and this is what's interesting. So how much they each know the other's feelings is a really complicated question to me.
That's a great question, though, right? Is how are each of them reading between the lines the whole time? And neither one seems to have the strength or the guts to put it all on the table and straight up say it. I mean, Emma comes close. Yeah. Emma comes real close when she says, why don't you ever just say what you feel? Right? She pushes him, but it doesn't achieve the result she was hoping for, which is him finally like exploding at her and saying what he really feels. But yeah, neither one of them wants to really put it on the table what's actually happening. And they both participate in the game, which is why I think they're both complicit in this relationship and the way it's built. Sadly.
I think, like, in this moment, she says, am I? In a very vulnerable way. And he says in a very quiet voice, yes.
Yeah.
And they're not as close as they're going to be in a later scene.
Right.
But they're like just one little push and they might say how they feel.
Yep. Yep.
But you don't, and this is the interesting thing, is saying how you feel is a scary thing to do.
Of course it is.
Because you risk rejection. And in this environment, it's really scary.
Yeah.
And Stevens in particular is, Miss Kenton has come, she's crying. She's expressed that she's a coward. She's expressed a lot of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
But taking that last step, they don't have the courage to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we changed the subject.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to hire her, then let's call her back in. And the only thing we hear about it is no gentleman callers. That's
right.
That's the big agreement. Because, and this again, it relates to the movie. What is the very first conversation that Miss Kenton and Mr. Stevens have when people fall in love in a house that ruins everything?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what is that they say to her? No gentleman callers.
Right.
Because falling in love is going to ruin everything. Incredible shot of sunset, and the car drives up into frame and runs out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spectacular shot with the red sun in the background. Unbelievable. And we cut to a pub where obviously Stevens has gotten there on his drive. And what is happening in the pub? Everyone believes, because they saw him in this beautiful car and he's wearing a beautiful suit, that he must be a gentleman of some kind.
Yeah.
And this is it's even more painful in the book. I think it's clearer in the book why he doesn't actually say anything. It is harder, in fact, in the book. In the book, he's not at a pub, he's at someone's house, and neighbors keep just showing up because they hear there's a gentleman there. And there's this guy who's kind of the political guy there, whose name is Smith. And he's expressing opinions about how all the people should be able to be involved in politics and all of our opinions matters and the people have to speak. And this is in direct contrast to the previous scene a few scenes ago with Mr. Ben, where he was, and with Miss Kenton, both of which where he says, we don't know enough. We have to follow the important people. And this guy, Mr. Smith, is saying our opinion matters.
Yeah.
And they start asking him what it was his involvement in politics. And everything he says is perfectly true.
Yes.
He did meet Mr. Churchill. He came to the house. I was involved around supporting things that had to do with foreign affairs. It's all true. He's just not saying that he was the butler.
Right.
And then Dr. Carlyle shows up, who is the one educated man in the town. And they say, oh, this guy knew Mr. Churchill and Mr. Eaton. And Carlyle looks at him and goes, really?
He's immediately skeptical.
I think he knows right away.
Yeah. And that's Pip Torrens, who is just an incredible actor. He's bald now, so all his TV shows and films that he does over the last few years, he's bald, so people might not recognize him as a young man here. But it blew my mind to see him show up. I totally forgot he was in this movie. He's in Paul Dark and so many great British stuff. So yeah, he's a fantastic actor.
I didn't recognize him at all.
Yeah.
And it's that night, and he ends up, because he's staying at the pub, and they show him to a room, and it ends up, this is the owner's son's room who was killed at Dunkirk. Yeah. And Stephen sits down surrounded by pictures and the things of this boy that died in the war. a war that his boss is somewhat responsible for in some way that he supported.
Yeah.
That he was just lying about downstairs in the pub a few minutes before.
Yeah. Yeah. Surrounded by it all. Yeah.
And then, and it's, again, these scenes are all linked because we've heard him say to Mr. Ben that the point is to follow someone with good moral character and to trust them. And Ben going, well, are you sure you trust them? And then the scene with Miss Kenton saying when they're firing the Jewish servants, like, hey, we have to trust our job. We can't know enough.
Right.
The scene in the pub with Mr. Smith saying we can know enough. We should be involved. And now Stevens is serving some guys in tuxes and they're talking about the common man. And, you know, are they entitled to give an opinion? Exactly what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And they say, Mr. Spencer would like a word with you, Stevens. And he asks a ridiculous, complicated question about debt situation in America and the gold standard. And what do you think? And he says,
I'm sorry, sir, but I'm unable to be of assistance in this matter.
Oh, dear, what a pity.
And then he asks him another complicated question about arms agreements and Bolsheviks. And Stevens takes it in and says, I'm sorry, sir, I'm unable to be of assistance in this matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you watch James Fox, who is a great, awkward listener, and he knows what's happening is wrong.
Yes. But he doesn't stop it, Steve.
Yep.
He lets his servant be embarrassed by his richer friends. Why? Because at his core, he knows that they are lesser than him, so he doesn't feel the imperative. And this is a man, I would argue, who has been in his life longer than this German friend who shot himself in a rail car. And yet he's not willing to step up to protect his, I would argue, an important person in his life, as these men make fun of him and use him for sport to advance their stupid notions about how important it is for them to be in charge of politics and not regular people, which is, of course, juxtaposed to what Lewis said, how these people, the gentlemen who are sitting in this room right now, have no business being in politics. So it's funny that they can subject Stevens to it, but get upset when Lewis subjects them to the same kind of treatment. It's funny.
Well, and the questions he's asking are totally unfair. It's like, just because someone doesn't know like very complicated details doesn't mean their opinion doesn't matter.
Right.
You know, and there's a whole bunch of things these lords don't know. Like if Stevens has said, well, excuse me, my lord, if we had to serve 37 guests and we need to have these foods, how many servants do we need? And how long will it take to prepare the thing and organize the thing? And where will you get the food and blah, blah, blah. The lords would have no idea.
It's a great point, dude. Yep.
Like the wealthy person has no understanding of the experience of the poor person.
Right.
You know, and so and yet the wealthy person or powerful person in all societies, including ours, feel perfectly comfortable making decisions for those people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so, and I love when the third question is coming and you see Stevens, he knows it's going to come again.
Yeah.
He knows that he just has to stand there and take it. And it's brave and sad in this weird way, watching him prepare himself to take this. And he again says, I'm sorry, sir, I am unable to be of assistance in any of these matters.
He's holding the cup again, like he does at the beginning of the film, to the lords, just standing there until they take. So he has to stand there and take it. You know, it's just the same thing.
And this, you know, asshole goes, I have now proven why democracy doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's basically what he's saying.
Right.
These people's opinions, you know, how could we possibly accept the opinions of a million people like him?
Thank you, Stevens.
Thank you, my lord. Thank you, sir.
What a jerk.
Yeah.
Horrible. We're back in the present driving with the doctor who had offered him a ride. And he says, I hope you don't think me very rude, but you aren't a manservant of some kind. And I think Stevens is relieved.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
He said, you know, and he says, yes, I'm a butler, and that he's at Darlington Hall. And the doctor says, oh, wasn't Lord Darlington, did he have something to do with appeasement? And first thing he says is,
sorry, sir, I never knew that, Lord Darlington. My employer is an American gentleman, Mr. Lewis.
And we hear a little bit more about Lord Darlington. He made deals with Hitler and helped cause the war. And there was some big libel suit, and Stevens pretends he doesn't know anything about them.
Yeah.
And they're filling up the tank of the car with gas. And Stevens says,
Sir, I must confess that I failed to tell you the truth. I did know Lord Darlington, and I can declare that he was a truly good man, a gentleman through and through, to whom I'm proud to have given my best years of service.
He doesn't say that in the book. He says nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And this is why the character in the book is more painful.
Yeah. Right.
You know, than this character. This character at least admits the truth on some level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we get in the same thing of the doctor trying to figure out, well, did you share his opinions?
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I was his butler. I was there to serve him, not to agree or disagree.
Right.
By the way, that one of the things Ishiguro said is that we are all butlers. He says it's tempting to all of us to say, let's leave it to someone upstairs. I'm just trying to do my job. I'm just trying to protect my life.
This is so funny you say this, Steve, because this is something that Scarlett Johansson is getting a lot of pushback on, because she said recently people get upset when actors don't have a point of view or about politics. The thing is, I didn't choose to be a politician. I'm an actor. And a lot of people came back at her for that because of what it indicates, that you're not willing to use your platform to help people who you might deem as less fortunate. And she said, I don't think actors have obligations to have a public role in society. Some people want to, but the idea that you're obligated to because you're in the public eye is unfair. You didn't choose to be a politician. You're an actor. Your job is to reflect our experience to ourselves. Your job is to be a mirror for an audience, to be able to have an empathetic experience through art. That is what your job is. Well, whatever my political views are, all that stuff, I feel most successful when people can sit in a theater at home and disappear into a story or a performance and see pieces of themselves, or are able to connect with themselves through this experience of watching this performance or story or interaction between actors or whatever it is. And they're affected by it and they're thinking about it and they feel something. You know, they have an emotional reaction to it, good, bad, uncomfortable, validating, whatever. That's my job. The other stuff is not my job. And so a lot of people were really upset about this and came back at her. And although she has, I think, a valid point to make in that you shouldn't be required to talk about your politics all the time, the other side of it is, well, if you have a platform and you've been like played roles that are whitewashed, we're up for a role where you're not an LGBTQ or still a transgender person and you took the role, but then turned it down but then gave up the role when there was a backlash. You know, I think she's one of these people that's found herself on the wrong side of these situations, and now she's pushing back against some of the criticism about it, you know. So I don't know. I always feel like if you have a public platform, you should use it for good. But then again, not everyone feels that way. So
I'm actually mostly with her.
Yeah.
I think, and you know me, I want, you know, any bit of public platform I have, I'm going to say my stuff, but that's who I am. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't judge whether or not she's a good person based on whether or not she uses her platform for those things, because also she might suck at it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it might not be her bag at all. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, not everybody is supposed to, you know, we don't need people who don't understand anything about politics talking about politics just because they have a platform.
Easy.
You know?
There. Now you're in the room with Stevens. Calm down there, Steve. Calm down a little bit.
But it's also, what choices does she make in her life? You know, like, because I do believe with great power comes great responsibility, and that the richer you are and the more famous you are, the more your actions affect more people.
Yes.
So the choices of parts that she takes is one of those things. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like I am certain there are some famous people who say nothing and give millions of dollars away to charity.
Oh yeah,
for good causes. You know what I mean? And I don't need those people to get up on a stage.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're not good people.
Agreed. Agreed. 1,000%.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
And she's married to Colin Jost, who's very outspoken politically on Saturday Night Live. So,
well, there you go.
I say, I don't want to be a bore, but I'm intrigued. I mean, where do you stand on all that? If a mistake was to be made, wouldn't you rather have made your own?
And this is related to everything we've been hearing. It's what he said to Mr. Ben. It's what he said to Miss Kenton. It's what Mr. Smith was saying in the pub. It's the guy that was asking him the questions. It's all this thing is, does your opinion matter?
Right.
Does expressing yourself matter?
See, in a very small way, I did make my own mistake. But I might still have a chance to set mine right. In fact, I'm on my way to try and do so now.
What's interesting about this movie and about that line is this movie is about the big and the small. It's about the political and the personal. And in both cases, he did not stand up.
Yeah.
Both cases, he did not express an opinion. And in both cases, bad things happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't write the one where he was in the room of this dead kid that got killed in the war that his lord was partially responsible for.
Right.
But he's now in the car to try to write the other.
Right.
Maybe.
And we see the change in him as a character because he was willing to admit to that doctor his service to he would have. I mean, him lying to people is so out of character for Stevens already. Like, yes, will he kind of not tell the full, like, what he's fully feeling about something? Sure. But flat out lying or letting people assume something different about him is the uncharacteristic thing. But it's clear that he feels shame, for having given that. And so the when he talks to the doctor, there's this filling the petrol. It's almost like a release, this emotional release. He's able to tell him. And it was because he was kind about asking him about being a footman or a servant. And so he's able to divulge it. And the doctor takes it well and asks these questions and is seeking to understand more than judge, and you can't, that's a good thing, I think. And certainly Stevens surrenders some of his feelings about it. Yeah.
Well, and these are all the little ways that makes the movie Stevens easier to deal with and more sympathetic than the book Stevens, because the book Stevens doesn't make this admission. The book Stevens, it does make perfect sense while he's lying to all the people, because you see him, you're in his head, you hear him lying to himself throughout the whole book. And it's to me, it's like the difference between Don Quixote and Man of La Mancha. So in Man of La Mancha, there's this crazy guy who thinks he's a knight and thinks windmills are dragons and thinks this prostitute is a princess. And even though he's kind of crazy, because that's how he sees the world, it helps the world. And we're kind of inspired by his beautiful view of the world. In the book by Cervantes, it's all making a joke of this guy.
Yeah.
It's all that this guy is a fool. There's nothing heroic about it. It's all about making fun of and tearing down knights in shining armor and all that stuff and saying that's all bullshit. So the Cervantes book is more painful and darker than the Man of La Mancha musical. And it's not quite as far away because this is very much following the book, but it's still that book. I've read it now twice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever want to read it again. It's a fantastic book, but it just hurts the whole way through. And when we come back to the past, we have one of my all-time favorite images of service in this house, which is ironing the newspaper.
Ah, yes. The ultimate in servitude, for sure. Ironing the newspaper. Make sure it's crisp.
You know what I wonder about that? Does Lord Darlington even know that newspapers come wrinkled?
It's a good question. I'm sure he's been out and about in the world and seen wrinkled newspapers, and so it's made him even more thankful for ironed newspapers, I'm sure.
It's just so ridiculous to me. Stevens is opening up the curtains, and there's Lord Darlington, and he asks about the Jewish girls, and even says,
one would like to do something for them. It was wrong what occurred. I'm sorry about it. Very sorry.
Yeah, so we see him changing his tune as things are getting worse and worse. And he's seeing what we assume he's seeing or sensing, that the German situation is not what he thought, that the Nazis are not as clean as he had imagined. And this atonement of his perhaps is not going as well as he had anticipated.
Except he doesn't say, I was wrong. He says, it was wrong.
It was wrong, right.
It was wrong what occurred, as if this thing just happened.
Right.
And he's sorry about it, not sorry about what I did. There's this, and what's really funny is it just occurred to me that it's almost like he's professionally distancing himself from his actions in the same way that Stevens is distancing himself to all his culpability in all of the decisions that happen around him.
Yes, as a good executive would, distancing themselves from their mistakes.
I can't imagine what you might be referring to there. And we're in the conservatory, and he's talking to Miss Kenton, and he says, the Lord asked about the Jewish girls. He wondered where they were. He said it was wrong to dismiss them. And there's a reaction, and then he says this line.
I thought you'd like to know because I remember you were as distressed as I was about it.
Right. And Miss Kenton immediately shoots back, as you were, as I recall, you were absolutely fine with it. So calling him out on it. Once again, here's Stevens repeating what his lord just did, removing himself from the situation or distancing himself or trying to change the point of view of what actually happened in order to keep himself clean in the process.
Now, really, Miss Kenton, that is most unfair. Of course I was upset, very much so.
And it's funny because I've watched the movie many times and I watched the commentary track. And in the moment that Lord Darlington is saying to do this in the library, you can see that Stevens is against the idea. He knows that it's wrong.
Yes. He says they're good workers. They're on time, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
But by the time he's talking to Miss Kenton, any sign that it's wrong is totally gone.
Yes.
So she's 100% right. And I love what she says. She says, I wish you had told me at the time. It would have helped a great deal to know you felt the same way.
Right.
And then this line, I'm certain, is not in the book.
Why, Mr. Stevens? Why do you always have to hide what you feel?
Yeah. And this is the break we've been building to in the film. This real honest, finally someone says it. Why do you have to hide what you feel? And it's her calling him out, essentially saying this is the reason why we have been unable to move forward as a possible couple, why this house has the problems that it does, because you do not speak your feelings, and it's such an interesting line right at this moment.
And he is about to say something. We never get to know what he's going to say because Lena Headey enters. And then he watches her go, and she watches him watching her go.
Look at that smile on your face.
What smile?
You don't like to have pretty girls on the staff, I've noticed. Might it be that our Mr. Stevens fears distraction? Can it be that our Mr. Stevens is flesh and blood after all and cannot trust himself?
First of all, do you think that's true? Do you think?
Yes, 1,000%. 1,000% think it's true. And how she carries on needling him about it further proves that it's true when his reaction to her needling.
Them walking together in this moment, I think, is the happiest, kind of most fun thing in the film of their relationship, even though what he's saying isn't terribly nice.
You know what I'm doing, Miss Kenton? I'm placing my thoughts elsewhere while you chatter away.
Then why is that guilty smile still on your face?
Oh, it's not a guilty smile. Simply amused by the sheer nonsense you sometimes talk.
And again, this is light and flirtatious and kind of fun.
It is a guilty smile. You can hardly bear to look at her. That's why you didn't want to take her on. She was too pretty.
Well, you must be right, Miss Kenton. You always are.
This feels, even though he's being condescending and dismissive in a way, it's also fun and charming, and you could tell that he likes her. Like he's happy in this moment, don't you think?
Yes, well, happy, yes, and I mean he's being called out though, but totally. So there's a little bit of playfulness with her, but it's also done to mask his guilt. So if this is possibly happy, I don't know, to be honest with you, but I think it's ironic to be happy right after you're, speaking about an incorrect thing that you were complicit in.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like a way to kind of absolve yourself and not really deal with the seriousness of what actually happened and your role in it. So I don't know if happy is the right word. I would say he is trying to be blissfully unaware of his role in all of this. And Miss Kenton's playfulness kind of accentuates that or gives him even more impetus to act this way because she's not coming after him about it in a very strong way. So she's kind of letting him off the hook.
Well, and it's funny because here's what it is that in an entire movie where he has rejected any emotionalness at all, rejected the flowers coming into his room, rejected the emotion of his father, the fact that he's just being kind of pleasant, in this moment is just such a relief. By the way, Emma Thompson says that Anthony Hopkins, who she refers to as Tony, is her favorite acting relationship in her career.
No surprise. It shows.
And she says that this is what he would say. She says, Tony would say, let's not practice. Let's just see what happens. She said that if they just look at each other and listen, something would always happen. it's so interesting, this thing that has happened throughout the Cine-Files. We've had these directors who were rehearse, and actors who wanted to run lines and practice. And we've had these other actors is like, let's just do it and be in the moment. And it surprises me that Anthony Hopkins is the latter, you know?
Yeah.
Because he seems so refined and controlled, and like he's chosen everything he's doing, but I don't know.
This is the inherent thing here, isn't it? That we can be so deluded by someone who is acting so proper, acting so correctly, acting, conveying a certain level of status. They couldn't possibly be horrific or terrible or make mistakes, even if it's played by someone like Anthony Hopkins, who we revere and respect. And there's this insidious racism behind the Jewish decision as well. But there's this insidious thing of not calling out the racism when it happens, not forcing people to confront the racism when it happens. And this is carried on for generations in multiple countries, for centuries in multiple countries, including ours. And this is, once again, he speaks so properly. He handles himself so well. He's so above it all. And in the end, he ends up being shamed by Darlington. He does not have a relationship with Miss Kenton that he could have had. And he is alone, an old man alone, working a job for an American. So all of these things come to pass as a result of his actions. But there's also this is underlying stuff going on here that you have to catch as a viewer when you're watching films like this,
You just reminded me of the quote, and then I had to look up who actually said it, which is the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Yes, of course.
And that's Edmund Burke. I had to look up who actually said it. Charlie and the new maid, Lena Headey, are making out.
Yes, they are.
And we've already heard the very beginning of the movie was bad stuff happens. Yeah, I think Miss Kenton said, yes, the house will be at 6s and 7s when there's relationships within the staff.
Right.
And Emma catches them. And as she walks away, Charlie and I forget Lena Headey's character's name, Ben Chaplin and Lena Headey, say, "Oh, she'll never understand. She's old, must be at least 30." And Ben says, "Who do you think those pretty flowers are for?"
Right.
Okay, we've arrived at the scene that totally wrecked me.
Okay.
Stevens is in his parlor. Curtains are closed. James Ivory didn't want too much light. He wanted it to feel close and claustrophobic. And he is reading a book when Emma Thompson enters. And what she says is when they first did the scenes, she couldn't get it right. She had problems. And what she finally figured out was that she can't, and I think this is a really interesting acting thought, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. She said, "I was coming in with too much intention." What do you think that means?
I think that's absolutely correct. There is what she's essentially referring to is, I wanted to make the scene happen and make it very obvious what I was doing and what I wanted the result of the scene to be, which is, of course, there in the lines, there in the interaction. So that's what she's essentially saying. I came in with too much of a force when this is a very, very subtle scene. Deftly subtle, even though every move echoes volumes, it is so subtle in how it progresses throughout the scene. So if she's too aggressive or she's too intentional, then the scene loses its subtle power, which is what you want to get out of a scene like that. If it's overt, you lose the simplicity that you've spent the whole movie developing between these two people. This is the closest they come to consummating these feelings that have been building between them for the entire movie and their entire relationship.
I think that's totally right. And here's the thing I think of is having worked with and seen through teaching a lot of young actors, they'll frequently come in and play the end of the scene.
Right.
Like the scene ends in the big fight. So they come in with the fight energy. And it's like, no, the character's not there yet. Like, Miss Kenton at this moment, when she's walking into this room, she doesn't think anything is important is going to happen.
Right.
She's just walking into the room. And so she walks in knowing that this is an important scene with too much intention that ruins the scene. Here's what Anthony Hopkins this was the advice he gave to her. He said, he told her, think of those afternoons where nothing's happening and the air is still and heavy, a fly buzzing in a window pane, nothing to be done, nothing needing to be done, and that stillness comes in at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a beautiful bit. I mean, he's the actor, but it is a beautiful bit of direction. It's just, this is how it feels.
Yeah.
This is how you feel.
Yeah. So that when what happens, it's a surprise, as these things usually are when they do happen.
What are you reading?
A book.
Yes, what sort of book?
It's a book, Miss Kenton. Book.
And she reaches for it, and he pulls away. The vulnerability of Anthony Hopkins in this moment of just clutching this book. It's so small and it's so powerful. And it becomes flirtatious in this really strange way.
What's the book? Are you shy about your book?
No.
Is it?
And he literally backs himself into a corner. He almost collapses. His body folds in upon itself.
Is it racy?
Racy?
Are you reading a racy book?
Do you think racy books are to be found on his lordship's shelves?
And again, she asks to see the book. And he clutches it to his chest and says,
please leave me alone, Miss Kenton.
Does he want her to leave him alone?
Yes, I think in some measure, yes. In other measures, no. But of course, as we've spoken about earlier in the first part, he is emotionally a child. And so this is him struggling, having the internal civil war within himself, because she will destroy everything that he is so carefully constructed about his life and his world. So when he says, please leave me alone, he's not talking about the book. This is not about the book at all, as we all know. But he's also saying, please leave me alone, because I am afraid of what will happen if I don't. You know?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Rather. Yeah.
He says, this is my private time. You're invading it.
Yeah.
Which is precisely what he said to her, almost exactly what he said to her the first time she tried to bring flowers into this room.
Right.
I want to keep this room businesslike, free of distractions. This is my private place of work. You know, is that, and it's so, I'm going to say this thing. I don't know if I'll keep it in the episode, but there is a sense of penetration is how I will put it, in her entering into him, you know. I mean, we're basically reversing the sexual male-female act.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know, it sounds like a weird thing to say in such a restrained film.
Right. Well, I think you're correct. She's penetrating his force field.
Yeah.
She's penetrating his force field, and he's allowing her to do it, by the way. He could physically push her away. He could physically run to the end of the room. He could leave the room, but he doesn't. And it's because he is enticed by it. He's attracted by it. He is interested in it. He just doesn't have the strength to act on it. And so he feels stuck emotionally and physically. So, and there's nothing wrong with her finally making a move. Do you know what I'm saying? She's making a move, and I think that's allowed. And he, and remember, the hand comes so close to stroking her face when she's looking at the book, and he doesn't. And that's the moment. And the moment he doesn't is the moment the relationship changes. It's over, because she is putting herself out there in such a vulnerable way, and he ends up rejecting her.
The next line I find so fascinating, which is, she says, "Are you protecting me?
Or are you protecting me? Is that what you're doing? Would I be shocked? Would it ruin my character?"
She's so flirty. And what I think she hopes that it is a racy book. I think, just as in the previous scene, it was, do you not like pretty girls? Or do you fear distraction? Is our Mr. Stevens flesh and blood? If it's a racy book, then he is a human, a sexual creature, a person that she could have a relationship with, a person that is hiding something really interesting.
Right.
And she moves forward. She's very, very close. And if you watch Anthony Hopkins' eyes, he's looking at her mouth.
Yeah.
In this moment.
Yeah.
and she literally has to pry his fingers off the book, like Anthony Hopkins, like Stevens had to pry his father's hands off of the mop earlier in the film. They're so close to each other. Yeah. And his hand, as you say, is right next to her face. Emma Thompson said she could feel the warmth of his hand next to her face.
Fantastic.
And she looks at the book and she says,
"It's not scandalous at all. It's just a sentimental old love story."
And we're in this moment. They're so close to each other. This is the moment in most movies where people kiss.
Yes, they would normally kiss. Yes.
And I think he is a tiny breeze. If a breeze hit him in just the right way, he would kiss her. That's how close he is in this moment.
I read these books, any books, to develop my command and knowledge of the English language. I read to further my education, Miss Kenton.
How often do you think he reads romantic, silly, sentimental love stories?
I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe a lot.
I think he reads them all the time. I think he reads them all the time.
Yeah.
And then he says, "I really must ask you, please, not to disturb the few moments I have to myself." That's like a slap in the face.
Right. It's a rejection. It's a full-on rejection. It's like I said, he rejects her at the end. Yeah.
And she heads out very upset. Emma Thompson said, "This scene was so intense. At the end of it, she was close to fainting on every take. Could barely catch her breath." This scene, I remember seeing in the theater, and I was sobbing. I don't know why it hits so hard to me. And maybe it's because I'm a restrained person too. Sure. You know, I'm not emotionally terribly demonstrative, and so I relate a lot to Stevens. But you know what you said earlier? You said in the first episode about him being an emotional infant. He looks like an infant. He looks like a child in this scene.
Yes,
100%.
She's breaking, as we all do when we're like our walls are down and we're fully exposed, and by someone we are attracted to, by someone we love, we can be reduced back to infancy, because that's where we first discover love. I learned that in therapy, that our first ideas of love come from us when we're infants. So stands to reason that we can be reduced to being infant-like when we are in love, because that's what we kind of unconsciously or subconsciously resort to. Yeah.
I think it's a really good point. By the way, when complimented about the scene, James Ivory's response is, "Oh, we got lucky with that one."
As a good director should say.
Yeah.
Always, giving credit to someone else. Yeah.
In the next scene, Lena Headey informs Miss Kenton that she and Charlie are getting married. And that sure they don't have any money. And she's like, "Well, you know, this could be a good career for you." It's like, we'll be fine. We're in love. And now we're with Stevens and Miss Kenton drinking cocoa in front of the fire.
Yeah.
And they're talking about these two staffers that are falling in love. And
she's sure to be let down.
Oh. Well, it's no use crying over spilt milk. Besides, we have far more important matters to discuss. Next week's meeting. You know His Lordship is planning an invitation of
tonight.
Sorry?
I've had a very busy day. Don't you realise that? I'm very tired. I'm very, very tired.
Why is she so upset?
Well, because of the rejection, and because she sees young love blooming. And so for her, it's like, I've wasted my life here. I've wasted years here pursuing something that will not happen for me. So her reaction is in that place, a frustration, emotional reaction, and logically so. And Stephen's reaction to absolutely cut her off at that point is also his way of retreating once again from the responsibility of the decision he's made. He retreats rather than saying, "What's wrong? What is going on here? Talk to me. Why are you so emotional? Why are you upset? Let's talk about this." He resorts to, "Oh, I didn't know bringing up stuff from the day was going to upset you like this. But you know what? We won't talk about it anymore. You know what? I'm out of here. You take care of yourselves. We'll just keep it." And then she retorts back. It's a great scene of power, right? Shifting power dynamics in the moment. He's trying to move past this thing that she's really upset about. He's trying to move past it. She wants to talk about it, but he's not going to talk about it. So she gets mad that he wants to move on to talk about the day. and gets emotional. He says, "Oh, well, if you're emotional, I just won't have these conversations anymore. I thought these conversations were great for us. Clearly, they're not. I'm going to take off." And she keeps saying, "No, stop. No, I'm not saying that." And he leaves. And she says, "Well, I want my day off. I'm going to take my day off." So it's this shifting power throughout between the both, and it's the ending of the relationship. That moment, Steve, that we just talked about, that scene is the high point of the relationship, and everything is the devolution of the relationship after that.
Well, and I agree with everything you said. And I think that, the first rejection is with the book. And then and by the way, in the book, it's very clear they've been meeting for Coco every night for probably years. Yeah. This is their regular and probably their most personal and emotional time for either of them in the day. And he just goes, "Oh," and he doesn't just say, "Let's not do this anymore." Yeah. He says, "We'll communicate during the day, if necessary, by written note."
It is a complete push away. Yeah.
I think there's two ways to think about Stevens, and it's not a black or white issue, but one way is that he really isn't aware of what's going on around him to some degree, that he's not 100% consciously clear of why she's crying, and he's not 100% consciously clear of what's happening in Germany with the war, the big and the little. There's another way to look at it, that he 100% knows exactly what's going on throughout all of this stuff. And how we decide on that, to what degree does he know or not know, to me determines how you're going to feel about this guy.
I'll throw a third one out there for you.
Okay.
I think that he doesn't want to know.
Yes.
So I think there's not knowing, there is knowing, and that there is a consciously and actively deciding not to know, not to find out, right? He doesn't ask about the Germany stuff. He doesn't ask her about why she's upset, or he doesn't inquire to find out because he doesn't want to know. And his reaction to reject her in such a stronger way than he did with the book, he's saying, "We'll just through written note, or only if we have to, we'll communicate," is his way of trying to reclaim some kind of power in the situation as well for himself, because he's probably upset at how close he came to consummating that relationship.
I think that's what I think too, but I also think that the position of not wanting to know implies that to some degree
Yes.
Because you can't not want to know something that you don't know exists. He knows bad things are happening in Germany. He knows that he is responsible for this. He knows that he's in love with Miss Kenton, and he's literally like closing that door in his brain to not have to deal with that truth.
Yeah.
He watches her from the window as she rides her bike away. He knows. I think he knows what he's doing.
This is the end.
And we're in the pub with Mr. Ben. And we hear, again, it kind of falls into something we've been talking about a lot, which is Mr. Ben didn't want to be in service because he felt,
look, if I don't like something, I want to be in a position to say stuff it.
The rights of the people to have their opinions, to be responsible for their own ideas.
Yeah, it's the changing of the guard, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then I suppose I'm not a real professional, like Mr. Stevens.
Again, this amateur professional thing. By the way, one of the things that Emma Thompson said in the commentary track during this scene is she said that the screenwriter, Ruth Power Jahabvala, said, "Anytime you want to change a line, let's talk about it. You're welcome to adjust lines."
Wow.
And Emma Thompson was like, "Well, you're the writer. You did this for a reason. We should never change that." And both James Ivory and the screenwriter were like, "No, you can change it." And the actors were the ones saying, "We're not changing a word," which I find really interesting.
And rare.
Yeah. And respectful on both sides,
True.
And he says he doesn't want to go back in service. And he talks about starting a little shop or a boarding house in the West Country, and asks if he can get her another shandy. Do you like a shandy?
I've never had a shandy, and I can't imagine I would ever order a shandy, but sure.
It sounds delicious to me. It's a beer and lemon soda.
Okay.
Mixed together. And at first she says no, and then she says yes. And now we're outside. Here's a funny one, John. While walking out of the pub, you'll notice that Emma Thompson stumbles a little bit into Mr. Ben's arms.
Yes.
Do you want to know why Emma Thompson did that?
Cobblestones?
She said, "This is my Godfather moment." When Apollonia stumbles into Michael Corleone's arms.
Except they were actually in love. And Miss Kenton and Mr. Ben, you could argue, were probably never actually in love.
I just think it's hilarious that the thing that we spent like months on, that I found a reference to in the next film. Yeah.
Supposing someone was to ask you if you'd like to come in on a small boarding house by the sea.
And she doesn't know. And then he uses the name Sally, which she says that people called her when she's a kid. He says, suppose it wasn't theoretical, Sally.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kiss that she didn't have with Mr. Stevens, she has with Mr. Ben.
Yeah. Outside in the rain.
Emma Thompson says that she is desperate for a shag at this moment. That's her description. It's a very passionate kiss, and she pulls away and she rides off in the rain on her bike. There's a very weird scene with Lord Darlington in his bedroom, just really upset. Everything is weighing on him. He's, and you can see the Jewish girls and the wars and everything. And he's not sleeping in his bed. He's sleeping in a camp bed he's set up in front of his bed. He's just obviously wrecked. Mr. Cardinal shows up out of the blue, says, I've gone and got myself in a bit of a mess. Can you put me up for the night? And then starts asking questions. It's like, what's going on tonight? Is there a special occasion?
I am unable to help you there, sir.
And then Stevens goes to talk to Miss Kenton because we have Miss Cardinal here and we have to deal with it.
I shall see to it before I leave.
Oh, you're going out this evening?
Did he know she was going out this evening?
Of course he knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
We agreed that Thursday is my day off. But of course, if you should need me urgently, it's...
No, it's perfectly all right, thank you.
Dude, ask her to stay.
Yeah. Well, she's giving him one last chance.
Yeah.
One last chance here.
The man I'm going to meet tonight, you know him, Mr. Ben.
Oh, yes, Mr. Ben, of course, yes.
He has asked me to marry him.
Now she is the tiger under the table.
Yeah.
There's a big event going on again, just like before. Dad is dying, and there's a huge important event going on, and he has to put his emotions about Dad aside to deal with the big event. And now Mr. Cardinal has showed up because there's some other big important thing about to go on, and he's going to put his emotions aside.
Yeah.
And Miss Kent, she's given him every chance.
I thought you should be informed of the situation.
Yes, sir, thank you. That is most kind of you, Miss Kenton.
And she's near tears, and he says, well, I trust you have the most pleasant evening, Miss Kenton.
Yeah.
And she leaves. Then we see some cars arrive, and out comes some obviously very important people. Probably Neville Chamberlain and Lord Halifax are showing up, and some Germans showed up. Stevens is dealing with them, and the Germans, this is just so crazy, but they're looking at the art in this house.
They're casing the place.
Like, exactly. That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah,
we're going to have this sometime. Terrible. And Stevens, when he's alone for a moment, he checks his watch, which is exactly what he did when his father was dying. It's like this moment to compose himself and focus on what he has to focus on.
Right.
And the big people are doing some big negotiation that's basically about, don't worry about Czechoslovakia. Nobody should die because of this Czechoslovakia thing. And they say Hitler is a man of peace. And then there's some bobbies there because they've been running security, and Miss Kenton came back and they grabbed her.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
What was that all about, do you think?
I think literally it's like the president was there and the Secret Service was all around.
Okay.
And she wrote, that's exactly what I think was going on.
Okay. All right.
And that's in the book too, by the way.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then we have this conversation.
I trust you had a pleasant evening. Bob, did you have a pleasant evening?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Would you like to know what took place?
I have to return upstairs. There are events of the utmost importance taking place in this house tonight.
Even though the most important event in his life happened on her date.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing. They did this scene, they shot it, and James Ivory felt that Anthony Hopkins was not intelligible. He couldn't understand what he was saying.
Oh, wow.
And he asked him to do it again. And they had a huge fight.
Wow.
Hopkins was like, I did it. It's not going to be better. I'm not doing it again. And Ivory goes, I couldn't understand what you're saying. We have to do it again. And Hopkins, who sounds like is the, lovely and easy to work with,
of course,
just lost it, shouting on the set, went to his dressing room, would not come out Emma Thompson had to talk him down and get him to come back to set. And what they said was it was a really draining and emotional scene.
I'm sure.
And what's interesting too is apparently in this first take where he was not intelligible, Anthony Hopkins cried, like had tears.
Wow.
And James Ivory, when he finally got him back, said, "Never do that again."
Wow.
And what I find so interesting about this, and you can see he's very restrained in this scene.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is both people totally doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Anthony Hopkins internally was feeling what he was feeling. He was going through it emotionally fully as an actor should.
Yep.
And the director was standing back and going, "I can't understand what you're saying. And if you cry," which I agree with that, if he cried in that scene, it actually ruins the scene.
Yep.
It's the restraint that's making it work. And so, they had a big fight. And then they went and got what's the right scene.
Well, sometimes you've got to, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Steve, on sets or not on sets, but sometimes you got to, let the tea kettle explode a little bit and then, was it open the pressure valve a little bit and let the air out and then everybody can come back to normal? Because it seems like such a difficult tightrope to walk to create a film like this and create a character like this, needing to blow off a little bit of steam in a certain moment because you're essentially conveying how much it's taking out of you to play these scenes, and how much it's challenging you is okay. As long as it's a healthy way to do it, it's okay. And if everybody can come back to normal, understand.
This is obviously a huge and long conversation, but for those of you out there who don't work in this industry, who've never acted, who've never worked with actors, you should know that and you're the actor and I'll defer to your opinion, but for the most part, if you're going to play an emotional scene to some degree, you have to feel those emotions.
Oh, yes.
You're not just pretending to be upset.
Mm-hmm.
You're upset,
Yeah.
And it can be draining and emotional and complicated.
Absolutely. It takes so much out of you, for sure.
She tells him that she accepted the proposal and he says, "Congratulations."
Am I to take it that after all the years I have been in this house, you have nothing else to say to me?
You have my warmest congratulations.
I just say I can't explain what he's doing. The performance is so incredible.
It is.
He's so little and they're so emotional.
It's completely restrained. He's not going to give her what she's looking for because he cannot surrender his pain. He cannot. It would cause destruction internally for him that he may not recover from.
And then she, I will say, lashes out at him in what is the most brutal way to attack Mr. Stevens, which is his dignity.
Did you know you have been a very important figure for Mr. Ben and me?
Oh, in what way?
I tell him stories about you, about your habits, about your mannerisms. He finds it very funny, especially when I show him how you pinch your nose when you put pepper on your food. That always has us in stitches.
And again, he takes it in and says,
"Doesn't indeed." Well, please excuse me, Miss Kenton. Night.
And he walks away.
He absorbs it. And once again, and a little bit of fault on Miss Kenton's side as well. I don't know. She may be a little bit more emotionally mature than Mr. Stevens, but not that much more mature than Mr. Stevens. She defaults to this attack again to reclaim power after she's surrendered her vulnerability to him. So she attacks him in a way to kind of put herself back in the superior position in that interaction. And it's unfortunate because she's been so just someone to cheer for. And in that moment, you just feel a little bit like, oh, why would you do that? But then you understand, of course, because she's in pain, from his just kind of nonchalant reaction to her being married or going to be married, the news of it,
Well, and I think what it is Stevens to some degree set the rules of the relationship. Like, we're never going to go past these barriers, and she is abiding by them and then using them against him. And you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like if he were a more open person when she first met him, we would never have gone down this path. She would have been a more open person with her.
Right.
With him,
But the real mindfuck is, would she have been as attracted to him?
That is a fantastic question.
Right.
And I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I think so too. Sometimes we chase the things we can't have because we don't think we're worthy of them. So we choose things that we can't have. So it reinforces that narrative within ourselves. And if anyone's listening, I had to discover that for myself in therapy, in relationships. If you go after people who are taken, who are unavailable, who are not giving you that emotional satisfaction that you're looking for, it is because you don't feel that you're worthy of it. And so you have to kind of navigate that within yourself. And I think in this situation, same thing. I think Miss Kenton was in this relationship with Mr. Stevens because him being unavailable to her was attractive to her for whatever reasons, and Mr. Bent is all about her and she's not attracted to him. So if you look at this psychologically, there are some self-worth issues that Miss Kenton never negotiates, never navigates, never really resolves. And it leads to the impasse that we have at the end of the movie, her decision,
Totally. I agree with all that. And I also think that Mr. Stevens, with all of his control, is an impressive person in the way that Mr. Ben is not.
Yeah, agreed.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, professional versus amateur. Yes, agreed.
Yeah. We're with Mr. Cardinal, Hugh Grant, who really wants to talk to Stevens. And he says,
we've been friends a long time, haven't we?
Do you think that Cardinal actually considers Stevens a friend?
A friend in the loosest sense of the word that you can use it, yes. Associate more than anything else.
So that's what I thought too. And then I just before we started recording today, I went, wait a minute. So Cardinal's dad dies.
Yeah.
We don't quite know how long ago. He might have been a little kid in this house, in this very formal house.
Good point.
He might have feelings about Stevens, who was there for him in a way that his father and godfather weren't.
Probably.
So there might be feelings of affection that are somewhat stronger, and he really wants to talk to him, and he really wants to discuss what's happening in the other room. And we get into the exact literal word for word lines of dialogue that happened when Stephen's father died.
You're right.
Yes, I'm perfectly all right, thank you.
Not feeling unwell, are you?
No. A little tired, perhaps.
That is exactly what he said when he wasn't dealing with the emotions of the death of his father.
Right.
He tries to get him to sit down. And finally, he orders him to sit down. And to which I'm like, well, if you're sitting down because someone ordered you to, you're still being a servant.
Yeah.
I can't. Sit down, damn it.
And then Cardinal goes off on what's going on in the other room, that basically they're making a deal with the German ambassador. And he keeps asking Stevens, like, don't you care? Aren't you curious?
It is not my place to be curious about such matters.
And supposing I told you that his lordship is presently trying to persuade the prime minister to enter into a pact with that bunch of criminals in Berlin.
Stephen says, I'm certain his lordship is acting in the highest and noblest motives.
You do please realize that his lordship's been the most valuable pawn that the Nazis have in this country over the last few years, precisely because he is good and honorable.
This is important, right? And this what the interaction, well, first of all, Cardinal to me is not someone you should definitely like feel that warm to, because in this moment he's using Stevens to get information. He's essentially doing to Stevens what is going to be done to him by the Lord Darlington's pals, when they constantly question him about what he knows and what he doesn't know. And it's really interesting to see what the movie is saying in this moment. Is the movie using Stevens as a representative of people who either ignore or choose to ignore or are blissfully unaware of the nefarious tactics that movements use to take advantage of people's sentiments or empathy or goodness in order to advance their nefarious goals? And is that what the movie is saying in this scene? Because you feel for Stevens that Cardinal is grilling him like this.
Yeah.
And you feel like, why are you doing this? He's just a servant. He just wants to blissfully do his job and blah, blah. But by the other side of it is, it seems like the movie is saying, you can't be this, because people like this, as you just mentioned the quote earlier, Steve, these are the people who stand by while this evil takes power. while this evil moves into a position to be able to do things that it does. And it's an interesting moment, and it left me with a lot to think about as I was watching it this time, as I think about our world, and how many people are so afraid to call out their parents or their family members or their friends for some of their more troubling points of views, or racist or misogynistic points of views, or, troubling points of views, because they don't want to have a problem. They don't want to cause a fight. They want to kind of ignore it, or they think there's no way to get through to them. And I think that's, in a way, indirectly complicit to creating these movements, or these movements getting stronger in our world.
I think this is what makes this a really good movie.
Yeah.
Because at no point do we, other than the Germans who came in and started casing the place, right, there's no bad guys in this movie. Right. Like, Lord Darlington is a good guy, an honorable guy. He's trying to do what's right. He wants peace. Is that Stevens is trying to do what he thinks his duty is to do. Yeah. Cardinal is trying to do what's right. And Cardinal doesn't hate Lord Darlington. Far from it. He loves him. That's what makes this so hard. And I think that presenting this complexity and presenting all these gray areas is what makes the movie good. And it's also this more realistic,
Yeah, agreed.
Things aren't easily divided up into good guys and bad guys. There's a moment I love where Cardinal says,
Look, I hardly have to tell you how I feel toward his lordship. I care about him deeply, deeply. And I know you do too.
Yeah.
And Stephen says, in a very odd, emotional way,
yes, I do indeed.
I think in that moment he is thinking about Miss Kenton. He's saying, yes, I care about her deeply.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, I have no way of knowing, but that's what I think his beat work was.
He's being tricked, Stevens. Don't you see what's going on here? Are you as deluded as he is?
And I think that in this moment, Stevens is as loony as he is. The woman he loved just told him she's marrying someone else, and he knows that he could have her.
Yeah.
He is as loony as he is.
Good point.
And then Cardinal says, "Oh, I've really offended you." "No, not at all, sir, not at all." And then he says, "You must excuse me." And he leaves.
Yeah.
Stevens walks down the stairs, and there is Miss Kenton. And she says, very, very upset, "You mustn't take anything I said to heart. I was very foolish a little while ago." And he could say, "That's okay," or "I'm sorry too," or "Let's talk about this." Instead, he says,
"Miss Kenton, I haven't taken anything you said to heart. In fact, I can hardly recall anything you did say."
Oh, man.
Yeah, this is him pushing back. This is him, again, like I said, it's power. It's all about power. And in that moment, he's trying to reclaim it back from her, because obviously he has thought about everything she said. As you just said, Steve, there's intentions to what he's doing that's related to her in these interactions with Cardinal.
Just occurred to me that Cardinal is sort of saying that Lord Darlington is ridiculous in his honor and his adherence to all this stuff, and it's leading him to making horrible decisions. And that Stevens, what did Miss Kenton do? She mocked him for all of these honorable, his professionalism, essentially. There's a very interesting parallel there. If you listen to Anthony Hopkins' voice, he's right on the edge of breaking in this scene. And he tells her to go to bed. You must be very tired. I think if she doesn't leave right then, he breaks.
Possibly. Yeah. Great point. Yep.
We're in the wine cellar. He pulls out what looks like a ridiculously old bottle of wine. He walks upstairs and drops the bottle.
Oh, damn!
Karen gasped. The bottle drops.
So did he.
It's so shocking. Yeah. And he comes upstairs. By the way, the bottle is made out of wax. That's how they do that. And he comes upstairs and he hears sobbing. And he touches the door and we see his feet moving forward. We see Miss Kenton. She's on the floor. She straightens up and says, "Yes, Mr. Stevens." And he could have an emotional connection with her at this moment. He could say something. And he says,
"Miss Kenton, I've been wanting to tell you. It's the small alcove outside the breakfast room. It's the new girl, of course. But I find It has not been dusted in some time.
And she says,
I'll see to it, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. I knew you would have wanted to be informed.
and he exits. And she cries. By the way, they did one take. and Hopkins said to James Ivory, that's it. We can't do it any better. And he said, okay.
There's a time to listen and a time not to listen to your actors.
And he stands outside her door for a while, and then he walks away. So in the book, he does not go in the room.
Oh, interesting.
And it's written really specifically. The way it's written in the book is that he kind of is thinking, I can remember standing outside her door in the corridor. And then for some reason, the memory is very clear to me. And I remember having a very, very strong certainty that behind that door, she was crying, even though I heard nothing. And I knew that if I opened the door, that I would see Miss Kenton crying. And that all he had to do was open up the door. And he remembers standing there in the hallway. He doesn't know how long. And he goes, it probably was only for a few seconds, but it felt like a very long time. And then he walked away.
Right. Wow.
And that is, to me, like the difference with the book is just so much sadder because he's so passive. The scene is actually crueler because he goes in and doesn't acknowledge her crying.
That's what I think. And I will throw this out there. Maybe people get upset. I mean, so be it. So fuck it. But like, I think a female director does not direct this scene to have him stand over her in such a powerful position as she cries. It's almost a submissive position. It's almost fellatio position, Steve. And I think that is not it's the one scene in the movie that I was like, I fucking hate that you made this decision. And I love this movie. But in retrospect now, looking at it, and especially with the eyes of 2021, when you're more aware of these things, I think this scene would have worked better if he keeps his distance from her. But coming upon her like he's this giant monster almost, I just don't see the point of that, to be honest with you, because it puts her in a even more submissive position that she does not need to be in this moment of vulnerability and tears. So.
It's funny because I actually dislike the scene too. I mean, I don't dislike it. They're brilliant actors.
Of course.
Beautifully filmed scene. But what I don't like about it is that I think to me, this scene is like, why does Miss Kenton like this guy? He's just horrible.
It's a great point.
The guy standing outside in the hall, who thinks she's probably crying, but doesn't know for sure and doesn't come in, is not as mean as the guy that goes in and stands over her while she's crying and says nothing to help her.
Right.
And also that guy is way more delusional. I mean, it's a very different thing. Yeah. Because part of this is like, why does Miss Kenton like this guy?
And maybe that's a ham-handed attempt for what's coming next when she leaves, that we're supposed to feel like, against him a little bit. So I don't know, but sorry, man. Go ahead.
We're back to the present. He's driving. He pulls out some suitcases, and we see older Emma Thompson getting ready. And then she's sitting in a parlor, and who walks in but Mr. Ben? This scene, by the way, is not in the book.
Okay.
And she doesn't want to talk to him. We hear that they never did open up that boarding house that they were going to.
Yeah.
And then he says that Catherine is expecting, their daughter is expecting, and she reacts, and suddenly she was pushing the guy away, and now they're coming together again because they're going to be grandparents.
Cut yourself shaving.
Can't seem to do anything right these days.
And she pats his arm. And I love this bit of acting is that she pats his arm. He tries to take her hand and she dodges it.
Yeah.
But I think if this scene doesn't happen, the next scene is entirely different.
Of course.
Yeah.
And that's why this scene happens.
Yeah.
That's the tragedy of this relationship. But also, I also sense that I wonder if Mr. Ben knew that she was going to meet Mr. Stevens. Maybe he sensed in conversations over the years there was an unrequited love there. And so he shows up all of a sudden right before she's about to go meet him with this news, we're going to be grandparents. And then he even says, like, I could pick you up in the bus and we could go together in a desperate attempt to stay with her. And he may even have cut himself on purpose so that she looks and sees. That's how nefarious men can be, Steve. You know this. Oh, well, both sides of the spectrum, honestly, in different ways. But you know, men can be nefarious when they're trying to get a woman back. They will put themselves through anything to try to get her back. So I would not have put it past Mr. Bent, who, as you say, is completely different than Mr. Stevens in his approach to life, that he would do these kinds of desperate tactics to try to keep her with him because he is absolutely lost without her.
Right. By the way, none of the Mr. Ben scenes are in the book.
See, there's a reason for that shit.
Because you're always in Stevens's perspective. So if he's not there,
good point.
Then because these are his memories in the book.
Right.
Mrs. Ben shows up and meets Stevens.
Yeah.
And this is what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And at first it's a little awkward. It's a little small talky. And then they dissolve. And I love that they're at some hotel and there's like a dance going on. And the song that's playing is Blue Moon. Blue Moon. Which is such a different, like that to me is what really hits of like, oh, we're in an entirely different time.
Yeah.
The Blue Moon world and the 1930s pre-World War II world are just miles apart, you know?
Yeah.
And we hear a little bit of details. We hear about that there was this libel suit that Lord Darlington was, called a traitor and he lost the case.
Yeah.
And it broke his heart. And then she asks about his godson and he says, killed in the war. And right in this moment, the waitress comes up. So we can't deal with that emotion for that.
Right.
And then he says, I know you remember Darlington Hall in its best days.
And perhaps the good days are starting again now that Mr. Lewis has taken up residence and Mrs. Lewis is expected to arrive from America shortly.
Very fortunate to have you there to run the house for them.
I love that he calls her Miss Kenton, corrects himself to Mrs. Ben.
I'll tell you frankly, Mr. Stevens, I had been thinking of going back in service.
That expression going back in service is like, it's not entering into slavery. That's not. But there's like a weird, that's not like, I've been thinking about going back to work.
Right.
Going back in service is different. And then she says, but it would have to be here because she's going to be a grandmother.
Yeah.
And there's only the slightest of pauses. And he says, yes, of course. In that moment, he knows his life is over.
Yes. Yeah. The life with her, at least, is over. Yes.
Well, what other, that's it. For him, you know what I mean? Like his life is empty. And just like in everything else, he just goes, yes, of course. And then she says this thing, and this is directly out of the book.
When I first left Darlington Hall all those years ago, I never realized I was really, truly leaving. I believe I thought of it as simply another ruse, Mr. Stevens, to annoy you. It was a shock to come out here and find myself actually married. For a long time, I was very unhappy. But then Catherine was born. The years went by, and one day I realized I loved my husband. You see, there is no one, Mr. Stevens, no one in the world who needs me as much as he does.
How does that contrast with Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens doesn't need her. And that's what's interesting in the situation, right? She desperately wanted him to need her. But in the end, he doesn't. And so is that one of the reasons why she pulled away the way she does at the end? Yeah.
But he does.
Well, yes,
but
not overtly, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like he doesn't need her. He's not going to cut himself shaving or not deal with all the stuff that obviously Mr. Ben can't deal with. Mr. Stevens can deal with everything.
Right.
But he needs her.
Everything outside of emotions, yes.
Exactly.
But still, there are times when I think what a terrible mistake I've made with my life.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we all have these thoughts from time to time.
He has these thoughts all the time.
Yes.
Now they're sitting on a bench and they're on a pier watching the lights come on and people applaud.
Yeah.
And they talk about this. People always cheer when the lights come on. For most people, the evening is the best part of the day. The part they most look forward to, Mr. Stevens. And he says, is that so? And he's staring off into space, just lost. And she asks him, what do you most look forward to?
Getting back to Darlington Hall, principally, and straightening out our staff problems.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
Yes, always was work, work and more work. And will continue to be so, I have no doubt.
To me, there always was work, there's always going to be work, and there continues to be work. Is like, my life has always meant nothing. It means nothing now. It will continue to mean nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be no change because there will be no Miss Kenton.
Right. Well, he's been around that hall long enough, Steve, that he is the hall.
Yeah.
No Miss Kenton. There's always work to be done. And he's been around so long, like that hall. So in essence, they're symbiotic in their, I don't know, just they're symbiotic. You know, they're connected in that way. The young people will come and go, but he will always be there. And that hall will always be there.
And then the music starts, that score that is just...
Oh.
Richard Robbins, we haven't really talked about it very much.
We've been so remiss, and I texted, in full disclosure, I texted Steve about this, and so now that we're near the end of our review of this, or our analysis of this movie, I have to say the score is so phenomenal, and I think I take it upon myself the guilt I feel that we didn't mention the score more, because I'm not a score whore like other people. It's not that I don't notice the score, right? I always hear the score and appreciate the score, but there are only certain ones that really kind of get inside me and are so essential to the movie. And I don't mean cues like Back to the Future or whatever, or Indiana Jones. I mean like just scores throughout the whole movie. And The Mission has been one of them. The most recent, The Invisible Man, Benjamin Wolfish's score was stellar. And watching this movie again, I could not help but be so moved by the score, impressed by the score, blown away by the score. And it is so, so essential in a movie about restraint to have a score that is a little more not restrained. And it really helps you to feel what is happening in all the scenes throughout the movie. And this scene is no different, you know?
Richard Robbins says that this was the most underscoring he did of dialogue. Like normally his style was you stay away from the dialogue. Score,
Yeah.
score. Then they're going to have a dialogue scene, then score. And the score has this sort of endless circular quality, like a memory that keeps returning and returning, like emotions that won't go away.
Yeah.
You know, it's an incredible score. It's in the rain. Stevens is with an umbrella. We're waiting for Miss Kenton's bus or Mrs. Ben's bus.
You must try to do all you can to make these years happy ones for yourself and for your husband. We may never meet again, Mrs. Ben. That is why I'm permitting myself to be so personal, if you will forgive me.
He's still the perfect butler in a way.
Yeah.
And she's crying now, crying in the rain, which is always good in a movie.
Yeah.
And then the bus comes on time for once. We're disappointed. If we had one more moment, then something could happen. And the music is very dissonant, and then it cuts out.
Thank you, Mrs. Stevens, and thank you so very much for coming. It was so very kind of you.
And she gets on the bus, and we see their hands holding each other's hands.
Yeah, it's a great close-up.
And she slips out of his hands, And then we see her on the bus pulling away, and her face, the tears as the bus pulls away, is remarkable.
But it's also like, why are you showing the tears now when you're on the bus pulling away? Why not show the tears to him before? And maybe he hasn't earned it, and maybe that's why she doesn't. You know, and I think she's crying for more than just the loss of Steve, it's the loss of the life she could have had, and also maybe feels a bit of guilt that she didn't make it happen herself, didn't force it somehow to happen. And now she really has to say goodbye to it, because maybe in her mind it had been always this possibility, you know, as things were falling apart with Mr. Ben, even when Catherine was born and, you know, there was a little more life, you know, because she said for so many years I was desperately unhappy, right? Why was she unhappy? Because she was with a man she didn't really love. And so she had a baby, and that kind of gave, and how many relationships are saved by children, or how many relationships stay together because they have a kid? That happens. And and so with her in that moment, I think she's crying for more than just the loss of Mr. Stevens. It's the loss of that escape, that possibility, that thing that maybe she has fantasized about in quiet moments out in the backyard or by herself in the parlor room or whatever, that gives her a little bit of hope to keep going, that there's a possibility out there that could come to pass one day. But now it's really gone. So in essence, her tears are mourning the final, the resting place of this love, the coffin.
What I try to imagine is how confident was Miss Kenton of Mr. Stevens' feelings for her? Was she, and it's somewhere between she was certain that he was in love with her, but would never say anything, to she was certain that he was not in love with her.
Yeah.
And I think it's vacillated throughout not only their time together, but throughout the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like at the moment where she's standing in front of him and his hand's near his face and she's holding the book, she's 100% certain that he feels as she feels. But then when he doesn't, he just says, "Oh, congratulations," and has no other reaction. Then maybe he doesn't feel this at all.
Yeah.
And I think in this moment of taking his hand and him saying goodbye, I think in this moment she's certain that he does love her.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what makes it. But I mean, I can't imagine. Can you imagine 30 years of your life being in love with this person that gives you nothing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, nothing.
Right.
Well, at this moment, sorry, do you have something?
Maybe I don't know if it's. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I don't know where I feel on that. Is it nothing? I don't know, because he, like you said, he set the terms. In essence, she agreed to the terms by being a part of this game they played, but in the end, doesn't give her what she wants. I think, or what she needed. I think might be a better, more correct, because I mean, in his own emotionally stunted way, he was connecting with her in some way, and between the lines, she could sense his affection for her, right? And so, but I don't know. You might be right. Maybe it's that, maybe you're right. I just don't know 100% where I stand on it.
You know what? Here's where I think I stand at this moment, which is that I think obviously both the book and the movie have very critical things to say about Mr. Stevens. I also think there's a way to go to have some fairly critical things to say about Miss Kenton, because what the hell are you doing? Like move on. Right, well, like the guy's not there for you.
True.
Like,
very true. And that's what I meant earlier.
Walk away.
That's what I meant earlier.
Yeah.
It's certainly something within her that she has not come to terms with or resolved with herself, And how many people get into those relationships because of that? So, yeah.
By the way, when they're screening this movie for the studio, at this moment, the president of Columbia yells during the screening, "Get off that bus." And the next thing he says is, when she doesn't get off the bus, he goes, "There goes $50 million."
Yep, executives, what do you expect?
Yeah. When Stevens gets into the car, there's just a look of total devastation and shock on his face, because he knows there's no hope. His life that's it. Lewis is coming down the stairs. By the way, I think I mentioned before, the guy who there's Senator Lewis, who's this drunk in the 20s who makes the amateur professional speech. The guy who buys the house is a different guy. And it's a guy who's not a particularly nice guy. He wants the status of, he's an American who wants the status of having the real English manor with the real English butler.
No, fair.
And he is disappointed in Stevens, particularly because at one point Stevens, when he brings over some fancy guests, and the woman who is asking Stevens questions, trying to determine if he's the real deal as a British butler. And he denies that he worked for Lord Darlington.
Right.
And then his boss yells at him. It's like, why did you say that to her? You told me you did work for Lord Darlington. You made me look like an ass. And it kind of yells at Stevens.
Yeah.
But in this, we have the lovely Christopher Reeve, who comes down the stairs.
Well, Lord Stevens, you're really getting things going here. This is wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
We're talking about the new housekeeper, and that she was an ex-matron. And he says,
"A matron, huh?"
Yes, sir.
Huh. Well, it sounds like she'll know how to keep us from misbehaving, huh?
I certainly hope so, sir.
Good. Good, Stevens. Very good.
You made a joke.
Yeah, and maybe there is a possibility of a future less conflicted for him, because this has been resolved in a way, and he can finally let it go, as you just said, Steve, about Miss Kenton for Mr. Stevens. He can finally let this go. So there's a more looseness to him, possibly. I don't know.
In the book, he is consistently thinking about banter, and that his boss had tried to banter with him and he couldn't banter back. And so he began listening to radio programs of comedy to try to learn how to understand humor, because he felt that now his job as a butler, that the expectation of his employer was that he would be able to banter back. And so he's consistently, like at the pub and when he meets the doctor, he tries to make jokes and it never works.
Now, this is where we had that banquet back in 35, remember? We all stood up and delivered ourselves of our principles. God knows what I said. Sure got worked up about it, though.
What did I say anyway, Stevens?
I'm sorry, sir. I was too busy serving to listen to the speeches.
And they find a pigeon. And the pigeon flies into the fireplace. And the reason they did this was because this happened on a tech scout. They were looking at one of the buildings to shoot in, and a pigeon flew into the building. And James Ivory found that really interesting. By the way, when they decided to bring a pigeon into this ancient house, the National Trust was really stressed out. They're like, that pigeon better not poop. That pigeon better not. And they run around and they try to grab the pigeon. Finally, Lewis grabs it. Stevens opens the door. Amazing shot of him framed in the window. And we let the pigeon fly away free. And there's a slow dissolve to a helicopter shot. It's like the pigeon POV. And that, as it flies away, is the end of the movie.
What do you think it means, the pigeon flying away?
It seems to me to be hopeful.
Yes.
It's about freedom. It's about moving on. It's about no longer being trapped. That's what it seems to me. And part of it is having read the book. Here's how the book ends. So the place where the lights turn on, that he's sitting with Emma Thompson and they talk about people being, that scene is after Emma Thompson has left, or after Miss Kenton has left, and he's sitting alone, and then a stranger sits down next to him, who it ends up was like worked in service, but never in a big house. And they talk, and as Mr. Stevens is telling him about, I was at Darlington Hall and blah, 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 he just breaks down in tears and starts weeping. And the guy kind of says, hey, no, it's okay. And he's like, I'm probably just tired. I've been driving a lot. It's been a long day. And then he gets back, and that's where this idea comes up about people always looking forward to the evening, which I think is a metaphor for the end of your life. People look forward to retiring, to settling down. And Stevens, of course, has nothing to look forward to. And when he gets in his car, he thinks, I'm going to give that bantering thing a try. I think I'm going to get good at bantering, and then and it's just a totally delusional moment of him going back to who he has always been. It's just, I'm just going to do a good job being a butler. So a very sad ending of the book. Whereas this pigeon flying away is pretty hopeful, I think, ending of the film. What do you think it means?
It's weird. I can totally see the hopefulness. But it's Christopher Reeve who picks up the pigeon, and whereas Stevens the whole time is telling him to be careful, what not to do, and blah, blah, blah. It's Christopher Reeve who is the more willing to put his hands on and let us know. Maybe in a way it's Christopher Reeve's influence that may change Mr. Stevens a little bit, and may, allow him to spread his wings a little more. And I think or it could be the symbolism that it's Miss Kenton, the memory of Miss Kenton finally being let go out of the house, out of Darlington Hall. That's a possibility. She's flown away. She's the bird that got away. She's the bird that flew away from this place. Didn't want to be restrained from this place, in this place anymore, and is finally, with the final scene between them, has been allowed to be let go from the hall and the memories of Mr. Stevens. I don't know. Maybe.
I think that's ish what it is.
Ish is good. Yes, ish I'll accept.
By the way, the first cut of this film was 3 hours, and I love what James Ivory says about that. He says, you want to cut it down. He says, not just because no one will sit for a movie that long, but because but this is what James Ivory says. He says, but because you haven't done your job. You don't want to show anything that isn't good enough. You want to get rid of all the stuff that's not first rate. And that's what I think
Okay.
too.
And there's like, I think there's like 12 minutes of deleted scenes on YouTube for anyone who's out there listening to us who's curious to see what the stuff was that was cut. That you know.
The Columbia president was wrong. It was very successful, made a lot of money. It was nominated for picture, director, actor, actress, screenplay, design, costumes, and score, and it won nothing.
Incredible.
Total blank. Tom Hanks won for Philadelphia that year, which is a spectacular performance. Holly Hunter won for Piano, which I haven't seen in a long time, but it's a good movie. But the big thing is that's the year of Schindler's List.
Right. In no way, and I'll go to my grave on this one. In no way is Tom Hanks's performance in Philadelphia better than Liam Neeson's performance or Anthony Hopkins' performance, in my opinion. Forrest Gump, absolutely. Hell, I'd give it to him for Saving Private Ryan. But Philadelphia, I just feel like he wasn't quite there. Kind of like Tom Cruise in Born on the 4th of July. He's just figuring out how to really deliver a dramatic performance. And I just don't think it was earned for Philadelphia, in my opinion. And I feel like because a lot of people, are very felt that the gay community was underserved. I think a lot of people voted for Tom Hanks because of that performance, and also because they actually probably enjoyed it as well. But I just feel like, in my opinion, I felt like this performance is an acting class, and so is Liam Neeson's in Schindler's List.
I saw Philadelphia in the theater when it came out. I've never seen it since. I thought at the time the performance was amazing. I think Anthony Hopkins' minimalist performance is just incredible. John, what are your final thoughts on Remains of the Day?
Every once in a while, doing the show, we get to revisit a film that neither of us have seen in a bit, and we get to discover the joy of it again. And this is one of those films. And I am so glad that we got a chance to walk back into Darlington Hall and get to know Mr. Stevens and Miss Kenton again, get to see the world through their eyes a little bit. And I think it's an important film that gets lost in the shuffle. It gets dismissed as a period piece. It gets dismissed as a film from the early 90s when we were all into this English stuff. And in fact, I would argue it's the greatest of them. And yes, for all you Sense and Sensibility people and Howard Zen people and whatever, this is my favorite of those films of that time. It is because of the incredible performance from both Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson, the subtle, deft direction of James Ivory, and that incredible score from Richard Robbins. And overall, the story, the tragic, unrequited love of these two people that just resonates and is almost epic-like in its depiction in the movie. There is so much connections between this film and Dr. Zhivago that could live within inside you if you're watching both of these films back to back. So it's such an incredibly film, a beautiful film, and a gorgeous film that if it touches you, if it connects with you, will resonate with you every time you watch it, no matter what age you are at. So that's my feelings.
I think the thing I'm kind of struggling with a way to express is that there's a quality that Stevens is following that is called professionalism or dignity that I think is a truly admirable quality. Like if we said a person sacrificed, if a soldier dedicates their life to protecting their country and ends up sacrificing their life for their country, that's a hero.
Yeah.
If you think of like Mother Teresa dedicating her life to working with the poor, sacrificing, never taking time for herself, that's a hero. Although there's other things about the world of Mother Teresa that are maybe more complicated, but like these qualities of self-sacrifice are ones that are admirable. What's interesting to me is that the work Stevens is doing is exactly the same. Like if Lord Darlington had been Churchill, had been the hero, and you had the butler that was sacrificed everything they had to support that person, then we would say that he is a hero. You know what I mean? And that Stevens, from his position, he can't tell whether he's serving Lord Darlington or FDR or Adolf Hitler or Churchill. You know what I mean? The job is the same as the servant.
Yeah.
So I think what I think this film says to some degree is you got to look up and look around of what you are putting your life towards? What is it like? And that's why I think meeting the doctor and the people in the pub and Mr. Ben who say, hey, I want to be able to say stuff it, is that those people say, no, I need to be active. I need to know what's going on. I can't blindly serve. Right. And the other thing that I think is that because there's the political part of this movie and there's the personal part. The idea that he's sacrificing his personal part, the death of his father and his true love for this thing, is actually for Stevens a total defense mechanism and is totally there to not deal with his emotions. You know, is that he is afraid to deal with his actual feelings. And so he retreats to duty in order to not deal with that stuff. And so it's like, because he could say, hey, don't marry him. I got to go do this thing right now. Let's talk. But he doesn't do that. You know, he could say, I cannot deal with my father's death right now. I have to do this thing, but then I am going to deal with it. But he doesn't. So much strength goes in to protect him from the emotions he doesn't want to feel. He has an indomitable will to not do what he is afraid of, which is actually feel stuff. So that's what we think of The Remains of the Day. Of course, we'd love to hear what you think. You could visit us on Facebook, do a search for the Cine-Files. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, Audible, Google Play, whole bunch of other places. Leave your comments on YouTube. Please, please, please continue to review the show on Apple Podcasts. We're still just hovering right under 1,000 reviews. And I would like to cross that 1,000 review line. That seems important.
Let's go, people. Get on it.
If you want to buy or stream the show, you can do it on our website, cinefiles.net, through Amazon Prime. You can follow the show at Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. You can follow me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how about you?
You can always follow me at the Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram and see all the stuff I'm doing there. And also come on over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says. And of course, listen to me on the Geek Buddies podcast, on the Top 10 podcast, and assorted other places. So there you go. And look for some new announcements coming possibly very soon. We shall see.
Ooh, I like new announcements. I don't even know what these are. So I'm very serious. I'm going to be waiting with all of you to find out what the new announcements are. And I think that is it for this week. We will see you next time for another great film on the Cine-Files.